Okay, into this mess strides Santa Anna, one of the most complex figures in all of Mexican history. Santa Anna will be president of Mexico, what, six, seven times? It's amazing how he keeps showing up. As late as the 1860s, he's still showing up. Uh, Santa Anna had been an officer in the Spanish Army. He was born in Mexico. Then after Mexico gained its independence, he becomes a general in the Mexican Army. Uh, Spain tries to recapture Mexico in the late 1820s. Santa Anna is part of the effort that stops Spain militarily, and so he becomes a national hero. He was from Veracruz. And as I've talked about, Santa Anna had been part of the massacre in San Antonio when Arredondo had come up to recapture Texas in 1813. So he comes up and he's able to take Santa Anna. He's able to take advantage of the very, very chaotic political situation in Mexico in the 1820s. I just can't emphasize to you enough um, how chaotic Mexico was during this period. Something like 40 governments in 40 years. It's pretty crazy in Mexico. And a lot of these are the fights between the liberals and the conservatives, the centralists and the federalists. And so Santa Anna he's one of these folks that's able to take these terrible times and to do quite well personally by manipulating the situation. So he is elected president of Mexico. He promises that he is going to bring Mexico out of its chaos. And then he does something which is kind of amazing. He realizes that he's going to have to, as president, he's going to have to make some reforms that are going to be very unpopular. And he decides that instead of doing that, he's going to have his vice president do it. So what Santa Anna does is he retires to his hacienda near Veracruz. His vice president undertakes these reforms. Santa Anna's right, they're very unpopular. And then Santa Anna launches a revolt against his own vice president, which is pretty wild if you think about it. But it also shows how smart Santa Anna was and how he was able to manipulate and maneuver through the chaos of Mexico during this period. And once he comes back into power in 1835, this is what's going to be significant for Texas. He decides that he's going to repudiate completely the Constitution of 1824, and that he's going to substitute, instead of that Constitution, a much more centralized and powerful Mexico City. So this liberal Constitution of 1824, the one that had given so much power to local states like Coahuila and local state capitals like Saltillo, when Santa Anna comes back into power in 1835, he just rips up that Constitution, and in its place, he writes a Constitution that makes all the power within Mexico City itself. It centralizes power in Mexico City and takes away the power that had been granted the state governments. Now, this was a very, very unpopular move. And all over Mexico, there were riots against Santa Anna. Basically, what Santa Anna has done in 1835, he's made himself a dictator, and he's made Mexico City all powerful. And one of the places that revolted against Santa Anna in 1835 was the beautiful city of Zacatecas. And in May of 1835, what Santa Anna does, he marches his army into Zacatecas, and he just brutally defeats the rebel in Zacatecas. He loots the city. A number of the citizens of Zacatecas are lined up and shot. Much of Zacatecas is destroyed. And basically, Santa Anna is sending a message when he comes into Zacatecas, which has rebelled against his rule and rebelled in favor of the Constitution of 1824 against Santa Anna. What he's telling all of Mexico is, if you rebel against me, I'm going to come in and I'm going to destroy your town. I'm going to kill your men. And just don't fight it. I'm more powerful than you, and it's too dangerous. You've got to go along with the new regime, and if you don't, I will put you down with my army with the most extreme sort of violence. So Texans are paying close attention to this, and they don't like Santa Anna because he's a dictator. But the other thing is, they don't like the fact that now all political authority has been centralized in Mexico City. Because remember, Mexico City is anti-slavery, right? Uh, Mexico City had always been anti-slavery, but the Constitution of 1824 kicked or punted the question of slavery to Saltillo, to the capital of Coahuila y Tejas. Well, once Santa Anna comes into power in Mexico City, he basically takes away any questions that Saltillo has sovereignty over. It all becomes centralized in Mexico City, including the question of the future of slavery and what will happen with slavery in Texas, which is very much in doubt anyway because of all the new Mexican policies in Texas. So here's the key point. Texans revolt against Santa Anna partly for political reasons, or in large part for political reasons. They are liberals. They want power to be in local hands, not in Mexico City. But Santa Anna has just completely reversed that when he comes into Mexico City and becomes a dictator. So Texans, for political reasons, revolt against Santa Anna. But slavery is significant in this equation because Texans know that slavery is much more protected when Saltillo has more say in Texas than Mexico City. Once Mexico City has all the say in Texas, Texans know that slavery is doomed. Because as bad as Santa Anna was, and he's pretty terrible, he was very anti-slavery, as were the people in Mexico City. So Santa Anna, when he comes into power, it's very dangerous for Anglo-Texans in two ways. They see their power ebbing in the sense that they had more say in Saltillo than they would ever have in Mexico City. But also, they like the Constitution of 1824. They like power being local. But they also realize that the question of slavery, which was barely alive in Saltillo, but it still had a pulse, that once the question of slavery moved to Mexico City, after Santa Anna tore up the Constitution of 1824, that slavery was doomed in Texas. And it was probably doomed very quickly. So this is the significant reason that Texas opposed Santa Anna. They didn't like a dictator. They didn't like his violence. They were freedom-loving. But they also realized that Santa Anna's ascension to power and his centralization of power in Mexico City meant that slavery, sooner rather than later, was doomed.